History has wronged many women, but few stories feel as cruel as that of Joanna of Castile, forever branded as the Mad. But was that nickname fair? Did she truly lose her mind under the weight of a tragic life? Or was madness simply a convenient label used by the men around her to permanently remove an ambitious, intelligent young woman from power? Let's explore her story together in this video. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. So, if there was ever a person who was never meant to become a queen, but on whom the crown nevertheless fell like a crushing weight, breaking her life, then it was probably Joanna of Castile. She was born on November 6, 1479, into the family of the powerful Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. Joanna was the third child of the couple, which meant that no crown of either of her parents' realms was waiting for her. Her fate seemed decided in advance, a successful diplomatic marriage, just like that of her sisters, all of whom eventually became queens. Isabella and Maria became queens of Portugal, and interestingly enough, they both married the same king, just at different times. Catherine, meanwhile, became Queen of England, and unfortunately, the wife of Henry VIII. Their mother understood how important education was for women, and even though at the time it was not customary to educate young princesses so thoroughly, she still gave all her daughters a truly brilliant education. Joanna studied history, law, mathematics, languages, reading, grammar, dance, poetry, music, and the visual arts. And according to descriptions by her contemporaries, Joanna was one of the most gifted of all her siblings. At the same time, she was known for being rather reserved and introverted, yet also strong-willed and uncompromising in character. There are quite a few dark rumours surrounding Isabella's methods of raising her children. Allegedly, when Joanna allowed herself to waver in her faith, her mother subjected her to a coercive punishment known as la cuerda. It supposedly involved tying parts of the body with ropes and suspending the person until the arms were injured, or even dislocated under the weight of the body. But let's pause for a moment and actually ask ourselves, did Isabella really torture her daughter in such a refined and cruel way? The primary source of this story is the work of Gustav Bergenroth, published in 1868. That is almost 400 years after the events themselves. At the time, he was translating letters from the Spanish court, and from his writing, it becomes immediately clear that Isabella was not exactly his favourite historical figure. Bergenroth himself was a Protestant, and in his work he claimed that Joanna was supposedly a heretic, viewing religion in much the same way as Martin Luther, and that this was the reason her mother treated her so harshly. Honestly, it all feels a little stretched, as if the facts were pulled to fit his own religious views. What's more, in the very letters he cited as evidence, the specific name of this alleged torture never actually appears. Instead, the word premia is used, which simply means coercion, and from that point on, interpretation takes over. Considering that Joanna herself was known for refusing food at various points in her life, it's entirely possible that her parents were, for example, forcing her to eat. And really, do you know even one parent who has never, at least once in their life, forced their child to do something? The story of these supposed tortures has taken such deep root in popular consciousness that people still write to me in the comments about what a terrible mother Isabella was. Even though, in reality, this entire story rests on just a single source. When Joanna turned 16, a suitable groom had already been chosen for her, Philip the Handsome. This marriage was part of a double diplomatic alliance with the Habsburgs. Philip's sister, Margaret, married Joanna's brother, meaning two powerful dynasties were joining forces to stand against France. But let's talk about Philip's looks for a moment, because when the words Habsburg and handsome appear in the same sentence, that alone deserves attention. If you look at his portraits, I personally find that name debatable. But then again, if your jaw wasn't enormous, among the Habsburgs you were already a star. Most likely the nickname comes down to translation nuances. The sobriquet can also be rendered as Philip the Fair, which actually makes more sense given his light complexion and pale eyes. But the most important thing is this: he clearly appealed to the young bride. When Joanna arrived in Flanders, the young couple liked each other so much that Philip even asked for the wedding to be arranged as quickly as possible, simply because they could no longer wait to give in to their passion. And it all seemed like a fairy tale, a young couple in love, the birth of their first children. But Philip turned out to be a husband straight out of a nightmare. First of all, he was a great lover of women, and his passion for his wife very quickly turned into passion for others. Second, he practically gave Joanna no money to maintain her own court. One envoy even wrote to Isabella that Joanna is so poor that she has not a maravedi to give in alms. The Spanish servants who had arrived with Joanna were never paid and slowly began to leave the court. Joanna was left in isolation, surrounded only by Philip's people. And whenever she expressed even the slightest dissatisfaction, which was only natural, Philip punished her with silence, by ignoring her, and by refusing to visit her chambers at all. In films and books, we are often shown scenes of Joanna throwing hysterical fits, or a jealous Joanna cutting her rival's hair, or even slashing her face with scissors. But it's important to remember that in historical reality, the author of many of these stories was, to a large extent, Philip himself. And they began to appear at a very specific moment, precisely when Joanna became the heir to her parents' throne, when the air itself began to smell of power. The thing is, between 1497 and 1500, misfortune struck Isabella and Ferdinand's family again and again. Death followed them closely, step by step. First, Joanna's elder brother Juan died. Then, his widow, that same sister of Philip, suffered a stillbirth. After that, Joanna's older sister Isabella died in childbirth. And soon after, Isabella's young son also passed away. So, beyond the immense personal loss, the deaths of her siblings and their children meant that Joanna was now the eldest surviving daughter of the Catholic monarchs, and therefore suddenly the heir to the thrones that Philip increasingly saw as his own. He even began calling himself the Prince of Asturias, the title reserved for the heir in Spain, fully convinced that everything that belonged to Joanna now belonged to him as well. Perhaps this mindset was rooted in his upbringing. While Joanna grew up seeing female power embodied in her mother, Philip was raised in an atmosphere of absolute patriarchy, where women were not viewed as anything more than objects of pleasure and childbearing. When the couple travelled to Spain in 1502 so that the Spanish nobility could swear loyalty to Joanna, Philip clearly expected to finally claim his place in the sun. But the principled Isabella saw right through her son-in-law rather quickly and arranged things so that Philip could claim, at most, the title of consort, which he absolutely hated. Sometime later, deeply offended, Philip left, abandoning his pregnant wife behind. Joanna found herself caught between two fires. On one side, a despotic husband, with whom she quite clearly had a form of sexual and emotional dependence, and who manipulated her through their children left behind in Flanders. On the other side, her ailing mother, who begged her to stay. Sensing her approaching end, Isabella wanted to prepare Joanna for rule and was, quite simply, afraid to let her pregnant daughter embark on a long journey of thousands of kilometres. It was at this moment that Joanna began to show the symptoms that would later be labelled as madness. She refused to eat and sleep, wandered the castle corridors at night and cried endlessly, until she was finally allowed to return to her husband. A husband who, by the time she came back, had already carefully constructed her full reputation as a madwoman. And I think this is the perfect moment to pause and really reflect on what we actually mean when we talk about the madness of Joanna. Well, first of all, let's remember that we're talking about the 15th century, with all the delights of medieval medicine that came with it. Today, we already understand quite a lot about things like depression or various mental health conditions. But back then, more or less any behaviour that deviated from the norm could easily be labelled as madness. I mean, just to put things into perspective, even 100 years ago, women were still being treated for hysteria with lobotomies. So we simply don't know whether Joanna was truly mad, or whether she was a woman abused by her husband. She was also practically pregnant and giving birth every year and a half, which, unsurprisingly, has a huge impact on emotional stability. It's also entirely possible that she suffered from postpartum depression. Very often, the argument for her madness being genetic points to her grandmother, Isabella of Portugal, who was also supposedly mad. And interestingly enough, her condition began after childbirth as well, which once again suggests depression rather than insanity. Another strong argument in favour of Joanna's mental soundness comes from Henry VII. He met Joanna personally when she and her husband were forced to stay in England for a time due to storms at sea. He noticed no signs of madness whatsoever, and later even wanted to marry her. Although her husband and those who came with him wanting her to be crazy, I only saw her as sane. Interesting, isn't it? Would such a pragmatic and calculating man really risk binding himself to someone who was genuinely insane? That seems highly unlikely. The Admiral of Castile, who met Joanna during the height of the power struggle between her husband and her father, and at the very peak of accusations of her madness, spent 2 days with her, and later stated that she never gave a random answer, considering her completely normal. Another important argument against Joanna's supposed insanity is her daughter, Catherine. Catherine was raised by Joanna after the accusations of madness, and after her removal from power, and yet she grew up not broken or unstable, but as a well-educated princess with a deep interest in the arts, eventually becoming Queen of Portugal. If Joanna truly belonged in an asylum, it's highly doubtful she would have been able to raise a well-adjusted child who later ruled a kingdom. Personally, I believe that Joanna may indeed not have been in the best mental state, considering that in a relatively short period of time, she lost half of her family, lived with a toxic husband, endured constant pregnancies and childbirth, suddenly had a crown placed upon her head, then lost her husband as well, and was finally imprisoned by her own father and son for nearly 50 years. But was she completely irreversibly insane? Absolutely not. We know plenty of male kings throughout history whose mental state was at best questionable, yet it almost never prevented them from ruling. But because Joanna was a woman, she was treated very differently. So what do you think? Was she truly mad? Or was it simply very convenient to call her that in order to take her power away? On November 26, 1504, Isabella of Castile died, and that meant that Joanna was now Queen of Castile. But both her father and her husband had very different ideas about that. Ferdinand did not want to lose power, nor did he want his son-in-law ruling in his daughter's name. Philip, on the other hand, was desperate to get that power for himself. As soon as the news of Isabella's death reached Flanders, Philip immediately proclaimed himself King of Castile, Leon, and Granada, rather unceremoniously pushing the actual queen into the background. In response, Ferdinand struck coins in the name of Ferdinand and Joanna, King and Queen of Castile, Leon, and Aragon. Philip, in turn, minted his own coins. And after Joanna gave birth to her 5th child, they set off for Castile to claim the throne. During this journey, which included stays at the French and English courts, Philip demanded to be addressed as king, consistently keeping Joanna in the shadows, presenting her merely as his wife, and actively portraying her as mad. At the same time, Ferdinand decided to remarry, hoping to produce new male heirs. Meanwhile, a full-blown power crisis was brewing in Spain. The nobility was split into 2 camps. One part of the Cortes, the governing assembly, supported Ferdinand, who insisted that his daughter could not rule on her own and that he should act as her regent. The other faction supported the young queen, while Philip, of course, claimed the regency over his wife for himself. Throughout all of this, enormous pressure was placed on Joanna, from both her father and her husband. Each demanded that she sign documents beneficial to them, accused the other of forging her signature, and played ruthless political games, completely forgetting the woman who stood between them as both a wife and a daughter. Joanna tried to maneuver, avoiding direct answers. She attempted to hold on to power and refused to sign documents demanded by both her father and her husband. But in the end, they found a way to push her aside anyway. In the summer of 1506, they met and signed a peace agreement, stating that Joanna, on no account, wishes to have anything to do with any affair of government or other things. In practice, she would remain queen, but without any real voice or power. Just imagine the level of tension and the pressure this 25-year-old young woman was under. Almost immediately after the agreement was signed, Ferdinand changed his mind, and it's hard to say how long this confrontation might have dragged on, if, just 2 months later, the young and seemingly healthy Philip had not suddenly died of typhoid fever. Although rumours quickly spread that Ferdinand had poisoned his inconvenient relative during their meeting. At that moment, Joanna was pregnant with her 6th child. And this is where the story begins. The story that finally turned Joanna into a madwoman in the eyes of history and the public. The funeral procession of her husband, which stretched on for nearly 8 months. Films often depict this as Joanna eating, sleeping, and spending all her time with the corpse, kissing it, clinging to it. But once again, this is a dramatized version of her story. And there is another way to look at it. Joanna decided to accompany her husband's body from Burgos, where he died, to Granada, where her mother was buried, a journey of more than 600 kilometers. Today, this distance can be covered in about 6 hours by car. Back then, it was a completely different reality. First of all, Joanna was pregnant. At times, they had to remain in one place for several days because she felt unwell. During this journey, she gave birth. The labour was difficult, and there was no team of midwives with her, only a single lady in waiting who helped her. Naturally, she did not immediately continue the journey and needed time to recover. On top of that, the plague was spreading across Spain at the time, which required extreme caution while travelling. This may well explain why she avoided stopping at every monastery along the way, though later she was accused of doing so out of jealousy, because many of those monasteries were female. The chronicler who accompanied Joanna made no notes, suggesting inappropriate or irrational behaviour toward her husband's remains. It is possible that Joanna did open the coffin several times, but not out of morbid curiosity or a desire to kiss the lips of her dead husband. Rather, there were real fears that the body could be stolen. At the same time, throughout all of this, the young queen was trying to deal with the problems of a country torn apart by conflict and famine, and to gather at least some supporters around herself. If you read a more detailed account of her actions during that period, it becomes clear that she was not mad. She simply lacked experience, money, and real influence, especially when compared to her father. So, when, almost a year later, they met again, her father forced his daughter to hand over all power to him. She signed the documents, but made it clear that this was against her will. By then, however, Joanna simply no longer had the strength to fight. From that moment on, she was completely under her father's control, and he ruled fully in her name. Soon after, Joanna was sent into what was essentially imprisonment in Tordesillas, where she would spend 46 years in confinement until the end of her life. Out of all her children, she was allowed to take only her youngest daughter, Catherine, with her. And honestly, to this day, I still don't understand Ferdinand's cruelty. Was the crown really so important to him that he was willing to condemn his own daughter to such a fate? When her father died in 1516, having failed to produce another male heir with his young wife, Joanna technically also became Queen of Aragon. But she never learned about it. Her guards continued to tell her that her father was alive and ruling right up until her son had already ascended the throne. And it would seem that her son could have saved her. At the very least, he could have allowed her to live out her life with dignity as a queen mother. But Charles, who had last seen her when he was only 4 years old, felt no warmth toward the woman who gave birth to him. Most likely, he believed the stories told by his father's relatives who raised him, stories that painted his mother as mad, and he only tightened her confinement. Charles wrote to her caretakers, "It seems to me that the best and most suitable thing for you to do is to make sure that no person speaks with Her Majesty, for no good could come from it." And this was despite the fact that Joanna supported her son's claim to the throne during the uprising of 1520, even though Charles, as a Habsburg representative and essentially a foreigner, was deeply unpopular. She showed her loyalty. She could have tried to escape confinement and rule in her own right, but she chose her son instead. A son who in truth did not care about her. The only person who truly cared for Joanna was her eldest daughter, Eleanor. She tried to improve the conditions of the palace where her mother was held, creating a kind of small household within it, and fought to secure for her mother at least the right to walk outside, something Joanna had previously been denied altogether. Joanna died at the age of 75 after 46 years of confinement. In her final years, both her physical and mental condition deteriorated severely. She became extremely suspicious, could barely move, and was no longer able to care for her own hygiene. And although in life she received neither real power, nor respect, nor even dignified living conditions, after her death she was given a lavish royal funeral. She was buried in Granada, beside her husband and her father, the two men who broke her life, and whom she seems to have forgiven nonetheless. If I were to choose a historical nickname for Joanna of Castile, I would never call her the Mad. I would call her Joanna the Broken. Her story is the story of a stolen crown and a stolen life. Because if her husband and her father had not been power-hungry monsters, we could have gained yet another remarkable woman ruler in history. But one way or another, she still left her mark, at the very least in her 6 children, who went on to become kings and queens across Europe, making her the grandmother of Europe, long before Queen Victoria ever was. And if you had to choose a historical nickname for Joanna, what would you call her? Share your versions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next videos.